This is using the hero's journey to overcome obstacles and develop a growth mindset. This is an overview of a thematic curriculum framework that Kibbie and I developed over 2 years. And yeah, we're excited to share. So introducing, I'll go first. My name is Jackie Dillon. I am actually formerly a teacher as of a couple of months ago. I'm currently doing instructional design. I'm at a tech company, but this was what we were working on all the way through that. And yeah, Kibbie.
And I'm Kibbie Jensen. I teach for Dripping Springs ISD at the new middle school, Sycamore Springs Middle School. We are both English teachers, which I know is weird for a STEM conference, but this works as an SEL component in any curriculum. And then I am the daughter of a science teacher, a biology teacher, and the wife of a software engineer. So STEM is kind of just part of my life in general.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's me.
But yeah, you have to do it. I can't click through it.
I know. Shush. Okay, you go.
So we kind of stuck with the hero's journey, not just because it fits with English, because it does, but it is a universal framework that applies to all of our students, regardless of their background, regardless of where they come from. It just kind of fits with every single kid. It meets them where they are. Oh, that didn't come up. We taught the hero's journey in English as part of our plot cycle. Instead of the plot mountain, we did it this way, but we discovered that the kids began to use this as a metaphor for the struggles that they were dealing with, and that's how it kind of turned into an SEL component in our classes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important to note that if anyone is familiar with the hero's journey, this is the most compact one. There are several, and by several I mean there are many more different stages, but this representation of these 12 stages is what we used in our 7th grade classrooms. Okay.
And so we kind of talk about how in the fine arts and the liberal arts and then in the STEM fields that the social emotional learning and developing a growth mindset is really important, because innovation happens in all of those areas. It's not just in STEM that innovation happens, and it's not just in fine arts. Students need to kind of learn that their effort and their dedication to the process is the most valuable piece, and that challenges actually do lead to learning. And I like to say challenges, but we all mean failures actually lead to learning. And then unexpected outcomes are really just advantages to grow and to learn something new. And that's a challenge. I don't know if any of you have found it. I think teaching the growth mindset is probably the hardest piece, because kids like to be right and be right all the time. And especially some of our GT kids, they really struggle with pieces where they actually have to learn something and they're not just good at it naturally.
Yeah, and I think that's important to say even with the STEM, because again, while we're coming with an English background, 7th grade in particular, we're teaching them that they need to be reading text and information that's more difficult for them that they don't just get automatically. Because even if that's within our classrooms, that translates when you're giving them a biology text on looking about human systems, and if they're very overwhelmed by it, but just that skill of just okay, I'm gonna get through this. I need to break it down and use your English skills in your science and math classes, and really this interdisciplinary connection to make that early for them so that learning happens.
So the way we kind of do this is we start with archetypes. I think I moved this slide to a different location, but our archetypes are basically the characters that they meet in stories, but it becomes who is there to help you. In the SEL component, we really focus on who is your mentor, who is the person there who is ready to teach you and guide you and provide you the information that you need in order to get you to where you begin. And now the mentors in stories in an English class aren't always there to tell the hero how to do things. They lead the hero down the path and then let the hero go and fall and go through the trials on their own. And they'll swoop in when things become too hard for the hero. but they're not there to like kind of take over the journey for the hero. So it's really important that the kids learn and identify that person in their life. So that usually is a teacher. And sometimes it's not teachers, sometimes it becomes somebody outside of the classroom.
And it's important to note, we start also with the archetype of the ally and comparing a mentor and an ally because they share similar features, and really breaking down that like the mentor doesn't necessarily mean they're your friend, and really like what that means and how that's beneficial versus and really recognizing that those are two different things.
And then once they have the heroes, or they talk about where the kids are within that stage. So they started to identify themselves and go back and look and figure out where they are on the stage and determine whether or not it's a moment that they are giving up too early, or if they just have gotten to where they need to be yet in order to be successful. So we kind of go through this structure as kind of an analysis of where they are and why maybe that one thing didn't work right now, but it's not time to give up and do it, or to give up. It wasn't that you failed now, it was just that you are in this one part of your journey where you have to learn something else before you can be successful.
Yeah, and it really does lean into these like universal shared human themes. So if you have any kid from any background, there's something that you recognize with in all of our characters and then all of our lives. And so it becomes a really powerful way for them to not only see themselves, but to make connections with others as well. Speaking of.
So like we said, this is not just in English. There's a lot of ties to English, but things are going to have moments where they just absolutely struggle with what they're learning. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, we want that to happen because that's where innovation happens, is in that struggle. And figuring out
in fact, we start off the year with a research paper where they are asked to read a nonfiction book. And that really does throw some of them out of their comfort zones for the first time, because it's not your traditional setup. And we have them pick with like your real life heroes and who was helping them, and really seeing how you could extend this into not just a storybook character, hero with a knight in shining armor aspect.
So for us in English, we would of course look at books, and those were the books that we used last year. And then we dove into some film. And of course we were having the students kind of look at the hero and identify the hero and the different stages that they went through. And that's when they start making these connections to themselves and to the people in their lives and to the journey that they are on. So that's kind of how it works in English, through stories. Of course, in a STEM field, it's not going to work through stories. It's going to work a little bit differently. And so yesterday, in fact, I was talking to my sister-in-law, who is a chemistry professor at Aquinas College in Michigan. And she and I were specifically talking about science, and with a lot of the COVID stuff that's happening today and understanding how science works. And she shared her frustration that a lot of her students at the college level are so used to having these typical classroom experiments where they're controlled, they're set up for the students to do, and they're just set up to design a specific outcome. So essentially these classroom experiments that even she does in her college level classes are set up to succeed and produce a reaction that she was intending the whole time. And I was talking to her about the hero's journey. And in our brainstorm, she decided that it would be pretty interesting to change up a little bit of the way she did things, and allow the students to design their own experiments, which essentially sets them up for failure, because of course they're going to be making mistakes, which is what really happens in science anyway, is that most of your experiments are not going to work out the way you planned, and you have to adjust for them. And then it basically changing the way one experiment in her course works, where they're designing their own, allows them to kind of reflect on and improve what they would do. So at the end of whatever this experiment that she's planning on doing, it would be a reflection piece that she would grade, and to see that they understood, she said, more so the scientific theory and the scientific setup, that I tried this and this and this, I didn't get the outcome because of this, and here's what I would change as a result. So she's looking for that growth mindset. And she came about it with the hero's journey, essentially saying that we need students to make more mistakes in order to learn to come up with these great ideas. That if they are just following what the plan is and they never see the mistake, they give up too easy. And she's seen a lot of her college kids give up, and in some cases even quit college altogether, because it's just not that kind of challenge. They don't have that mindset that it's okay if things don't work out the way they planned. They've just had it written that way their whole life until they got to college.
There's the archetypes. These are the 8 archetypes that we use.
So when we're going through a journey, when a student does have a significant setback in what they were expecting, we kind of can walk them through the archetypes, the different characters that they come up with in an English classroom. And we talk about how the student themselves is usually what they're struggling with. And then, like Jackie said, we come up with the ally who's there for your emotional support, that they're your friend, they're going to help you out. And then we kind of talk about that mentor piece, who's there to guide you, who's that academic support. So all of these are the 8 archetypes that we use. There's a lot more. But we talk about identifying who's there and who's not. The guardian is my favorite when we're talking about an SEL component, because a lot of times the students will come across a guardian, and it's usually their teachers. Let's say it's a bad grade, they didn't do well on a test, and now we've become the shadow, we've become the villain of their story because we gave them a bad grade, when in fact we're really just the guardian who is acting and stopping them from moving on to their next thing because they haven't learned enough to go on to the next stage of this journey. And so really identifying the difference between a shadow and a guardian is really helpful for these kids to understand where they are in that journey and in that path, that when they're trying to get to their next thing.
Yeah. And really recognizing that that's not the stop. That's not your final stop. That's not the end of the world. That was just a hurdle, and learning how to overcome that and then keep growing. It's cool to see and have them talk through.
Yeah, so it's really great, because you don't have, in any good story, you don't have just one test, and a hero doesn't always pass their tests to begin with. A lot of times they struggle, and sometimes it will be the ally, a friend that's able to help them out because they just need some more emotional support. And sometimes the mentor will come in and provide the necessary tools or education that they need in order to move on and understand. So it also helps them identify and seek out help where they need it, and identify whether they need more of the emotional support. And like in our case, that can also be counselors at school or our mental health professionals, depending on the situation. And then in most cases, it's really going back to that teacher and going back to that person who has the academic knowledge that they need and can get the extra support from.
Yeah, and really just like to sum all that up, it's really encouraging for each student to take ownership of their own journey and recognize that they're just not like on a boat in a river out to sea. Those like 3 different water metaphors, but that they can understand it, that they can go in and make tactile steps to help themselves on their journey.
Yeah, this was probably one of my favorite outcomes, and it was an accidental outcome from the hero's journey, is that the kids definitely became more independent as 7th graders as they were going through this process, that they were able to take ownership for it. We saw fewer parent emails as we used this in our classes, and more student emails with questions. We had more students come into our office hours and our tutorials and ask us questions. And even when we went remote, we had more students emailing and asking us questions instead of parents. So using this as that SEL component and kind of developing that growth mindset throughout the year as kind of this framework helped with that. And it was a lot easier to answer directly to the students than to have to go through the parent and then to the student. So that was it was like a nice accident that happened there.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what we just said.
Okay. So when we're talking about the SEL component, when we go through this with our kids, we kind of talk about how to identify their true mentors and their allies. A shapeshifter is that person who is in and your friend and your ally when it's good for them, But when it's no longer working out for them to be your friend, they'll shift to the other side. And in middle school, unfortunately, that is a thing. And so we have to teach our middle schoolers that, you know, right now that's maybe not, their role isn't your ally. They are using you for whatever they need, and maybe they're not the right people to seek this emotional support from, or whatever you need. So we're able to have those kind of conversations with kids. That happens a lot with conversations about cheating. We have to have the shapeshifter conversation that, well, you thought you were helping them, but they were just using you. So we kind of, the academic honesty piece comes in with those shapeshifters often. And then, like I said before, understanding the purpose of guardians is they're guarding your next step and not letting you go until you're ready for it, and that it's okay to fail, that the next step is going to be bigger than the current step you're on. So if you can't get this current step, then the next step won't work at all. So it's not really setting you up for success rather than failure. And then keeping tabs on who the shadow really is, like who is your actual enemy. And for most students, it's actually themselves is their enemy. They are usually their own worst enemy in middle school. They talk themselves into and out of all sorts of horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And then the other thing we do is oftentimes they'll come to us frustrated, and usually, like we all know, we're teachers, they come frustrated about grades, and I don't know how I could fail, and this is awful. And for a lot of them, it's the end of the world in our district, that their parents have very high expectations of them, and failure for them is anything below a 90. So you get an 85, and we can have kids in our classroom pretty upset about an 85%. And we all know that that's not a bad grade. And so we have to really talk about where they are on their adventure. The 12 stages, you start off in your ordinary world, and that's just kind of who you are as a person. And what was your call to adventure? Usually in a classroom, it's your teacher has made you do this assignment. That is your call to adventure. And then you get into crossing the thresholds when you've dived into your assignment and you're starting to work. And that's where you get your test allies and enemies, and there's multiple tests. And so we have to show them that they're at their test and not what we call the supreme ordeal, which is like the ultimate big thing that they're going to do. And so they often think that their first little failure on a quiz or maybe a classroom assignment is the end of the world, when in fact it's just a piece that's showing them that they need to study more or do something else to move on. So it helps them plan and regroup for the next big thing and the next challenge within the same context of like the same unit.
So assessments. So it's still school. And so our job as English teachers is to assess the ELA TEKS. And so the STEM, obviously you have your TEKS as well. And so how we do this is we, just by nature of English, is focused on like introspective and reflection. And so we do a lot of what we call note card quizzes. And it's just a standard note card, and we will give them a prompt and then set up with our writing structure, and they respond to it as best they can with as proof as they can, depending on which book we're in or what part of the journey we're in or what archetype we're currently delving into. And then we end up doing essays where we get a lot of reflection. 7th grade is that unique time where we're moving you out of your basic skills and into how deep can you analyze? What do you think about this? There is no wrong answer. It's how well can you prove what you think? And that is how we assess that they're actually learning and taking this, because anyone could read the story of Cinderella, but assessing like Cinderella's allies and why, or like Gus and Jack, like helping her out and like that relationship and diving deep into that moves their thought process into so much more like in-depth thinking that then translates into any other form of writing. Whether that be their science class, when they're reading, again, like another report, you get hung up on a detail. You're like, why is that there? And then they know the skills to dig deep in other aspects of their life.
And we really are, in our framework, we tie this journey around the ELA TEKS. And so in a STEM framework, you're going to do your actual TEKS, your actual standards that you are teaching. And you're going to tie, if you use this, you basically tie the the hero's journey to what you're doing. So if it's a science experiment, that whole experiment itself becomes its hero's journey. My husband likes to talk, he's a software engineer here in Austin, and he likes to talk a lot about his status reports that they have to write. And those are almost like constantly about the test process, they're trying to figure something out, they haven't figured it out, and it's listing all the different ways they have figured it out or have tried to figure out a bug when they're debugging a program, and coming up with a different way to do it, but having it all written down on paper, seeing where other people have been in order to help with the process allows the rest of the team to kind of innovate and come up with ideas that they can try that maybe will help them move to where they need to be to get that program fixed and working the way they need it to work. So whatever you do with this, it becomes this framework that you kind of get to use how you want in a classroom, and it doesn't have to tie just to English. So our assessments with this become really personalized because we can sit back and do a lot of reflection. Of course, in English, we do a lot of writing, and I know in science, they do lab write-ups, and I know in other industries, STEM industries, there's lots of writing. I've seen it, but taking this writing and looking at it as a reflective approach and seeing what students actually understand as why something happened. And it's not so much like I didn't study enough, it's this didn't happen because this, or I didn't understand it, like diving in a little bit deeper as to why, because you can get the I didn't study enough, and that might be true, but why didn't you study enough? Because I didn't put, my priority wasn't here, and now I'm upset about this and I should have changed my priorities. So you get to have those kind of conversations with kids using this framework. It's also pretty adaptable. You can, if you know the framework and the hero's journey pretty well, you can use it in any conversation with a kid at any moment. And it can be about academics, it can be about something personally in their life, and it can be about you know, somebody didn't make the volleyball team or the basketball team, and you can kind of walk them through any of those things. So that's, in a nutshell, how we use the hero's journey to kind of help develop social emotional learning and a growth mindset. We're happy to take any questions because I know there's a lot. I don't know what you guys need and what you don't already, or you know, and you don't already know. So happy to take questions about this for you.
Oh yeah. Thank you to these people.
There we go. Everybody's done.
Any questions?
Any questions?
I have just a question for that last slide. I didn't understand what you meant by twice exceptional students. I couldn't quite follow that.
Okay, so I have a twice exceptional student will be the student who is both a GT student, a gifted student, and maybe a student who also qualifies for a special education or 504 services. So you're looking at your kids who have specific needs in two different areas. They may need a lot of academic support, yet they're extremely gifted at the same time. I happen to have, be the mom of one of them. I have a dyslexic son who is also a GT student. And so oftentimes this, this social emotional piece is really important for them because they know that they compare themselves with the other GT kids, the other, like what he identifies as the smart kids, right? And it takes him longer to get the information than it takes those kids. And so having the conversation about what is holding him back and why, and how it's not what he's doing, it's something that was kind of thrust upon him, and that's part of his journey, becomes a big piece for that kid.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm a science teacher, high school science
Awesome.
now, and like all the sciences. God help them.
All the sciences.
Yeah.
My mom was a high school science teacher, I know.
Plus economics this year. Yay. Small STEM academy. So I can see using this in science. I think it's a good way to rethink some of
Yeah,
I'm-
I think it does. I agree.
but yeah, I like this.
Is there anything that you would need to understand how to use it better? Because we have lots of resources. I just didn't want to dump a whole bunch of resources on you guys at the beginning of the school year. I think that's stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to have to think about that a little bit, but I'll definitely get in contact with you. I'm just,
Perfect. Like I was worried about that because
Yeah.
no, I think I like to make connections when I teach science. You have to do some direct teach because you got to have the skills, basic skills, and then you build on those. But I think it is a story. It's a huge connected story, all of science, all of everything we teach. So, and if you can't follow the story, and it's easier if for some kids, if it's not just like cold hard facts and that's all they see, which is what traditionally I didn't have that as much growing up, and I had a very traditional education, but to see the story and be able to connect everything. So that's one of the reasons I don't mind as much teaching biology, chemistry, and physics, because it's all physics anyway, and they all connect together. So, but I'll definitely reach out to you guys.
yeah, it was really fun talking to my sister-in-law about it the other day with how she was thinking about it. She's definitely one of the more unique college professors. She's going through the same things we are, trying to figure out how she's going to teach a class of 66 Gen Chem students at the same time in she teaches at Aquinas College. It's really small. The only room that can fit them is the ballroom. So it's not even a classroom that she'll be teaching in. She's not allowed to move the tables at all because they also have to use that for cafeteria overflow. It sounds just like public education. And it's a small private college. And then at the same time, she's having to figure out how to do labs. And so they're struggling with all of that. And how do you give an assessment for our remote classes? Because she decided she's just not going to give tests because she doesn't have permission to have kids come in and do tests in person. So she has to come up with a new way. And that's kind of how this started, this conversation about, well, what other ways? She asked me, she's like, what ways do you use? Because I know in English, we don't do a lot of tests, like
Right.
pencil paper tests. And so she said, I know you don't use a lot. And I started talking about the hero's journey and how we do a lot of reflection. And we grade the personal reflection and the rubric and use a rubric to kind of assess what they're learning. And it does take some structure at the beginning to teach them to not say, well, I just didn't study enough, right? Because you'll get those like stock answers. And when you build your rubric for reflection, if you include those stock answers as like the low end of the rubric, it solves that problem. So I was talking her through that, and she was pretty interested in kind of revamping everything, and with having to do Gen Chem at home, allowing the students to create their own safe experiments with the safe, with safe home chemicals at home, that if they did go wrong, that it would, just make a lot of bubbles. It wouldn't be anything too bad. So she was going to come up with a plan to do that, which I thought was pretty interesting. I was like, that's right. Middle school science teachers helping that, or middle school English teachers helping that college science professor. Great.
I love it. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
So it is something that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And just like, also it's interesting to see, because I think even from the beginning when we started doing this, like Kibbie and I's goal is always to be as like interdisciplinary as possible. We started with our social studies department, and we tie over and loop in because that is an easier move, but being able to use that and see it through science and like apply what you learn in the hero's journey, which is a more traditional like English theory, and move it into science. It's just like connecting that. I mean, that's science, or synapses moving around. Mm-hmm. And it's just so much more in depth. And then you get like, we'll see in our classrooms these tie-ins to the science and what they've learned as their evidence for supporting like Bilbo as he's going on some adventure through the forest. It's fascinating to when they connect everything. And so I just think that's such a strong time. Anytime that you can get to what seemingly very separate disciplines and see how they connect so easily, and learning becomes more of a circular flow versus like, okay, 45 minutes and then I'm moving my mindset here. And that's just not how you're going to incorporate all of this once you leave education. So
plus
my favorite part.
It's extremely fun to have a whole group of 7th graders whine at you when you use a science term in the classroom in an English class, and they get, this isn't even science. I often talk about our thesis statements for our essays and how they're really just a hypothesis for what you're writing, that you need to write your hypothesis. It's your statement of what you think is happening. Now go prove it. And they get, I feel like I get a badge of honor every single time they complain that I've used math or English or math or science in my English class. I'm like, yes, I won today. Teacher 1, student 0. It's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, see, I get the opposite because I was raised by 2 grammar Nazis, if you will. Also, like, so in the same way with my students, I've let up a little bit, so I won't just crush them. And they go, well, this is not English class. Well, communication, if you can't communicate, if communication breaks down, we're lost. So, keep your mind working at a higher level. Yeah. It'll help you, trust me.
And I've always hated that comment. I'm like, what? So when you're not in an English classroom, you can't write correctly? Like, it's just like the 4 walls make you remember your comma rules? Like, what is going on?
And then, then when we get to teach science fiction, I love to show the kids the history behind science fiction and how a lot of our science fiction writers have actually influenced current technology today, and how without that imagination that the scientists and the developers, the technology developers, wouldn't have even maybe thought of doing it, but it was because they read something in a book that made them think, ooh, I should make that. I mean, cell phones are the perfect example. And I always laugh at FaceTime and Zoom because it's very Jetsons. It's very Jetsons, like we're meeting and we just don't have the machine to put our good face on and our new outfit. But other than that, we are very Jetsons, because I remember being very little and wondering if I was like, how cool it would be to have a telephone conversation where I could see my grandparents and my, and the people from far away. And we get to do that now. And I really think that a lot of this was kind of there at that point. Comes from, they all come from the same place. Like you said, they're all stories. Whatever story we're choosing to tell in our classroom is our story. Sorry, I'm reading the comments in the section, making sure I'm not missing anybody's stuff.
You guys can feel free to jump on, open up your cameras, and poke these ladies for any questions that you have.
It's a short one because SEL is such a weird component that it depends on what's going on in your class, how to use it.
Do you have any specific resources that you love to use?
So
go to.
I use a resource on Teachers Pay Teachers for my hero's journey. That she has really good graphic elements that I use. But the big one is Joseph Campbell's, I probably have it right here. I don't know. I can't find the book right now. Joseph Campbell created A Hero's Journey, and it's fun to kind of look at it. He's basically, the theory is he went back all the way to Greek mythology and started identifying kind of a similar theme that it was happening with each hero's journey, or with each hero, and these are the steps that they were taking, and he was drawing connections between those. And so there's a good Netflix show with Joseph Campbell that you can watch with it. I wish I could find the book right now, but it's on the other side of my desk. I'd have to get up and go dig for it. I don't remember the name. So it's the Joseph Campbell one. If you want to find it, it's over there. My kids are in the room. It's the way we are. Yes, Hero with 1,000 Faces. Yeah, thank you. I was like, my brain is gone. Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces. There's also, if you don't want to read it because it's long, it can be, there's Joseph Campbell actually did videos, and so they're old PBS videos on them. But in reality, it's just talking mostly. That SEL component is less about we use the charts and graphs for classroom because we're charting and plotting our stories, and that's, that's part of our TEKS is the plot map. But when we're having the conversation with the kids, it's really about where are you, or is this really your supreme ordeal? Did you really just lose the big battle that you were setting yourself up for, or did you just lose a little one? And if you did lose the big battle, does that mean it's all over? And usually they figure it out, like, oh, I didn't lose a battle, I lost something little. Because there's always a reward and a treasure at the end. And then at the end of a kid's hero's journey, anybody's hero's journey, they come up with this this big aha moment, this moment of growth that they kind of get it. And that's kind of the journey of any learning. Like, you struggle until you get what you understand, and then your reward becomes this intrinsic reward that you know something. But it's also a circle. And so once you get your reward and you've finished that, it doesn't stop. It just springs you into a new journey. So the journeys continue. So you never come to an actual end. You just start a new journey with your next struggle, with your next thing. So with the SEL component, it's less about materials and more about just those unique and one-on-one conversations with kids. Yeah. And this year, I think it's going to be a little more difficult to do in the virtual world to start out with. It wasn't so bad last year when we had gotten to know our kids in face-to-face first and then had to go virtual. But starting this way is going to take a lot more. I'm going to have to be a lot more mindful about how to do this and incorporate the SEL component into my classroom, just so that I see some growth. I'm going to have them start journaling daily about that's going to be my piece. And I actually have created a virtual journal where it's just a Google slide that they're going to be going through their virtual journal, and I'll give them a prompt that will have an SEL component that kind of ties with the hero's journey every day. I haven't built that out yet, but if you guys send me an email, as I build that out, I'm happy to share with anybody who wants that journal, that they can take it and use it as well. I just haven't had the opportunity. We have 5 new teachers on our 7th grade staff this year. And so I've been more focused on getting them ready than getting my stuff ready this year.
Yeah. And then Ms. Moore is just like a generic resource. I'm sure everyone knows it, but like the hero's journey has been around for quite some time because Joseph Campbell is older. And we use YouTube. There's so many like videos that are fantastic and made and short and succinct. I would say you definitely need to watch them depending on your age group sometimes on what's going through, but they really do detail down and just the different, starting off with this, when we first start teaching the hero's journey, it's really the way in which you word it for them to catch on to it. That specifically, I believe, a middle school thing because they're so concrete and we are asking them to step out and be more like theoretical with this. And so having it stated to them over and over in different ways, the definition of how the journey works and what you're looking for in the beginning is a really good resource. There's this really funny one that we show every year that is that uses Happy Gilmore to break down the archetypes and the hero's journey. And I'm still surprised every year, like how they know that the movie is old now and like going into this. But that one is a great one as well because it's very much, we start off reading The Princess Bride, which is awesome. But it's a very, very big book. So on top of, we watched the movie as well, but the big book. And so it takes us a little bit longer, more time to sit in on how this character is going to be this archetype. Whereas when you can do a movie, so we usually start out with either Star Wars or Wizard of Oz, they can see more quickly and we can identify and talk about like how these qualities are here and then compare it to a book when we can dive so deep into a character. Like The Princess Bride does such a great job of giving us the backstory of Inigo and Fezzik, which the movie doesn't. And we really sit in that because within itself, we can show that it's its own hero's journey within a story. And what does that add to a piece of writing and why is that important to talk about and to note? And then again, bring back out for themselves. We read this really awesome book called Locomotion, which follows this young boy in New York, maybe like early 2000s, and both his parents die in a house fire, and him and his sister are separated in foster care. And it's written in poems. The whole book is poems, and it doesn't follow a chronological timeline. It pops back and forth. And so after having the structure of the hero's journey, we were able to take this like really abstract but beautiful story piece and plot it and align it and then really dive deep. And I think some of the connections that the kids are able to make to their personal lives from that book was so fascinating, but also the ties that they made to like Dorothy, like having to leave her family and like her journey and relating that type of it's just great how deep analysis we get out of 13 and 12-year-olds.
Yeah, we had a student last year who did his research project on what was it? It was the creation of insulin. So he was diabetic. So that's what he did his research project on. And of course, that's an English project. We're doing the research project in English, but he's going through the researchers who have like developed insulin, and then he had to present it. And so as he's presenting it, he's naturally talking about the hero's journey. Like, here's the hero, because without this guy, I wouldn't have my insulin pump, right? So that's how his buy-in. But then he's talking about how, well, first we did this, and this completely failed because it didn't work. And he didn't give up because of this. And so as they're doing their research project, they're kind of focused on this hero in history, and it can be science, it can be anything. They get to pick whoever they want. But they learned through this research piece that there were always things that got in the way and blocked them and stopped them. And this one person in this journey doesn't stop. And he doesn't stop because this person comes in and helps. And he doesn't stop because this happens. And he doesn't stop because this happens. And maybe he stops for a while here, but then it comes back up here. And they kind of learn that process through an actual historical person. And in this case, it was very scientific, which was actually pretty cool. Sorry, So I think that research piece is pretty interesting. And I think that could be brought into any STEM class when you're talking about any of the scientists or any of the researchers or any of the makers who make the things, anything that you're doing. Any of the computer scientists, none of them had a initial outcome that worked exactly how they planned. They all had mistakes and they all had things not work out, and then they had to reassess in order to come up with something. Your first prototype of anything is never what you end up going to sell, right? Our first cell phones did not look like what we currently have. And so there's definitely a process in that. And I think it's important for kids to see the real life version of that too, so that they can help apply that to their life.
Any other questions?
No more questions. I wish I had like long conversations about this, but it's hard to talk about the SEL component for a long period of time because it depends on your students. And I have my kids in here. They keep coming and trying to ask me a question. I'm like, go away. This is what you get for bringing your kids to your classroom and making them set up bulletin boards. and then leaving them in your...
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. There is one question here. It says the hero with 1,000 faces. I don't know if you answered that or not. But...
I did. Okay. They were actually answering my question, which was, there's this book that Joseph Campbell wrote. That's the name of the book. One of the resources. My brain it's just out of my sight on my desk. So I couldn't walk around and see it. So Hero with 1,000 Faces is definitely a really great resource for this. There's tons out there. You can simply Google 12 stages of the hero's journey and it's just there for you. I like watching it in Star Wars because Joseph Campbell actually worked on Star Wars and made sure at least the original 3 followed the hero's journey pretty much exactly. So he was working with them, and so when I can, I like to use Star Wars as that piece to kind of go through and talk to the kids about how it works, because it's a really accessible one for middle schoolers, and surprisingly, a lot of our middle schoolers don't even know that the original 3 exist. They only know about the new ones. So it's fun to get them back into some of the cool old movies.
I can think of well, it's physics, it's chemistry, biology too. A hero and her journey, Marie Curie.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon, they pre-screened Radioactive, which is based on a book which is very arty, but still interesting. And her journey and what she had to overcome and the obstacles and then life itself happening. So that I think is a wonderful framework with which to work, plus the crudity of her equipment compared to what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
It's mind-boggling.
I think it would be really fun to kind of take, if I were going to have to teach science this year, first of all, nobody would want me to do that. But if I had to do that this year, I think I might take a movie like that and tell the students that this was that was her scientific journey, like her hero's journey, and that they have their own that they're going to write this year in whatever thing I'm teaching. And so, my daughter's a sophomore in high school this year, so she has her own chemistry journey that she has to get through this year, hopefully without the help of her aunt. Hopefully she can do it on her own. But I think taking that journey and watching what somebody else did, and then having students go back and reflect on what they had seen from that movie into the struggles that they're having during science and learning and what's going on would be a really cool way to do that. And your English teachers would also love you because that's very Englishy too.
Yeah.
It's very Englishy.
So I'm thinking, there's always something that's a stumbling block.
Mm-hmm.
Science, but they could pick and pick one that's really just, I kind of get it, I don't get it, or and that they could follow that through the year. I could really make that.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool. I'd love to see, if you do this, I would love to see what it turns out like. Like, please share with me, because that is fascinating. Because I really think you can use this in anything. It's very easy to tie. Like, we usually tie with history. It's very easy with history to watch, here's what this historical person did and how many challenges they had to get to the point that they made our history books because they finally got to this. It's very easy to do that in history. But then to go back and apply it to themselves in history becomes a little bit of a struggle because they don't feel like they have done enough to be worthy of that. But I think definitely in science, that's where they could make that connection a lot easier, because it is a struggle. Science it shouldn't be easy, right? Science shouldn't be easy. You shouldn't just do it and it's done. The science should definitely be a struggle. That's kind of the definition of what it is a struggle. So I think that's a really cool place to kind of put that piece in there that I maybe can't get to in my English class or in a history class, is that personal connection.
I'm thinking now we're all on a hero's journey with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'm going to go this year with my journaling, is talk about that and I also think, so that's going to tie me back into my how I always easily connect with history. It also helps them write this piece that becomes a primary resource for later on. Like, they're going through their journey and they're writing and dialoguing their journey through the struggles that they're having. But, 60, 70, 80 years from now, that piece is a primary resource for people who want to maybe research what is happening, and they have it. And our kids have actually created it during class, but it's still useful to our teaks and what they're learning, which you could easily do in a STEM class as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would even say, similar to Kibbie, if you were starting tomorrow, you're just throwing a science class. I think that if this is something that like wanting to begin with seems like somewhat overwhelming, because like it does take us the first 6-9 weeks of school to really get them in. I mean, we're like hitting them over the head with the terminology and like constantly using it. So using it in the technical term with that, but it really is just like phrasing the questions that you have. So if you're taking them through the hero's journey of like a research or an experiment, like starting off being like, before this experiment begins, like, what are you seeing? How is it all being laid in? And then there's their ordinary world. And then asking the question, okay, why are we even going to be like conducting this? So if it's even, I'm going to pull out my kindergarten science experiment, but making ice cream, right? You have everything there. So you describe, but it's tactile. Like my ordinary world is a plastic bag, it's sugar, it's milk, right? And then moving it that way. And then being, instead of saying like your guardians, like what is something getting in the way of you right now? And it might be that my teacher made us make this outside, and so it's melting because it's warm, you know, like things, and moving it along the hero's journey in a very like scientific or in the experiment way, and then adding the challenges in what you learned. So that's our big one that we sit in a lot, is that they learn a lesson, which for us always ties back to the theme. But that could be the ultimate teak of a science experiment. And then afterwards, when you review it, you'd be like, you are like this little icon or character that's moved through this. And as you go into the next science experiment, like I want you to think of this as the story that you're telling to get to this top. And then it becomes more of a, in my opinion, a creative like way of, instead of just me taking notes on my lab and being like, oh my God, my teacher's making me do this. Very dramatic 7th grade, even very dramatic 21-year-old junior in college.
Right.
But so to me, that's what I would do, is just, it just becomes, I mean, storytelling is such just a general aspect of just being human. And so this constantly leaning into that, just like it keeps your connections, it relates your connections. You're just so much more like intrinsically pushed to do it. And I think that this helps with that in particular. And so that's how I would do it in the science classroom, as I wouldn't even mention Joseph Campbell until maybe later.
Yeah, I was like mentioning Joseph Campbell. I think understanding the stages is important, but the kids just need to kind of know where it is. But I would say that the hero's journey, the 12 stages, definitely match up with the scientific process almost exactly. When you go through your stages in the scientific process, when you're looking at things and making a hypothesis, like those moments, and then you start testing. Well, once you start testing, you've entered that other world where that's where you're coming up with your stumbling blocks, and that's in your journey. And so I think that they connect really well together. So you could use it kind of for everything. But yeah, attaching a narrative in all learning areas. I mean, we're the English teachers. We love that. Yeah, please do that. And tell us how we can attach any of your stuff into ours, because I love finding new ways. Like I said, history is easy. It flows. I can naturally tie it, but I love tying as much science and technology stuff into my classes as possible. I love those moments. Like I said before at the beginning, it's like my check. I won today because I surprised the kids with something they weren't expecting in my classroom. And I love that. I really truly believe that what I do in my classroom is not more important than any of the other areas, including fine arts. I believe that they're all kind of interwoven, that you can't really function in this world without having a general knowledge of all of the aspects. Like that's kind of where we're building these new global people. Like our students are becoming these global people. It's no longer just this, like you're going to stay here. And so you have to have knowledge from all sorts of different areas. And in order to do that and make those connections, you're going to have to kind of weave a story so that they make those personal connections and actually remember what we're talking about, instead of remember it for the test and then promptly forget it.
Yeah.
I want them to internalize it.
Yeah. I mean, like, even as we do this, like my personal, like idealized, like amazing educational system would be like in your English class, you're reading like Sound of Thunder for like Ray Bradbury, right? But in your physics class, that next one, you're talking about like the physics breakdown of possible time travel. And then you move to your economics class and you talk about like the little differences that might move, and you use the short story through all of it. And it's just like all tied in together. I just think that it's very difficult to do, but it's just brilliant when you can constantly connect and tie back to it.
Yep. In the dream world, we'd all teach one one big giant unit that everything worked well together. I wish our cheeks worked like that so that we could all teach like that.
Wow. Any more questions?
So we put our email in the chat. I will get the slide because the slide has my email too. I'm happy to share what I have. I just, like I said before, I didn't want to overwhelm you guys all with, I mean, we have 2 years of developing this. Mm-hmm. So when I say we have a lot of resources, we have a lot of resources. We pick and choose for what we need. And so it's probably easier for you to email and say, this is what I need and why I want to use it. And I can give you several sources instead of dumping probably the 300 or 400 sources and resources that we have into one folder for you guys to sift through. I can just pick them, and so can Jackie. We can just pick them really fast for you. And I don't mind doing that throughout the year. That's not a problem at all.
It's important to note that also that we have almost everything that we have is tiered. And basically we have like our inclusion level, our on level, and our GT level, which we merge depending on the student, like to do as personalized as possible, but we do that with our resources as well.
So
pre-PGT level.
All righty. Well, if nobody has any questions, we just want to thank you guys so much for joining us today, and to both Kibbie and Jackie for presenting your information and conversing with this group. If you guys have any questions, you guys know who to email, and be sure to tag out and just collaborate with each other.